Anybody who has built any product, service, or business knows that nothing happens in a straight line. What does that mean? Sometimes we expect things to go good every single day. We expect the work that we put in to always be fruitful. We expect things to never change. But that's really just not true. There's always ups and downs. It's the 2 steps forward, 1 step back philosophy. And I just want to share with you that that's going to happen in game development as well. That's going to happen with AI. It's going to happen with anything that you build. What I'm going to do in this video is create something in Unity. Now, I've chosen Unity as my game development of choice. I did explore, as I mentioned in previous videos, using WebGL, using Phaser, thinking about Godot or Unreal Engine. And I landed on Unity for a number of reasons. I believe there's a larger community using Unity. It has a huge community of code base that you can reference with AI. It has lots of documentation. And I think there are a lot of companies, I know there are a lot of companies out in the wild that use Unity, whether it's for slot gaming, real gaming, you name it. If you need to find a career in Unity and you know Unity, it's a great place to start. So for all those reasons, I'm going to start building in Unity. I don't know Unity very well. I know some engineers and friends that use it and know it pretty well. But what I just want to show you here is that you won't know everything all the time. You do need to dig in and you do need to learn. Now, you have resources. That's the good thing. You can find templates online, boilerplate templates. In this Unity project, I'm going to create a 2D game, and I found a boilerplate 2D project on the Unity Asset Store. I think it was about $50 to $60. I would encourage you to take those shortcuts, if you will, especially when you're learning. Now, using the word shortcuts, that sounds bad, but Unity engine itself is a shortcut, right? You're not building the engine from scratch. Now, I know Mojang, who built Minecraft, or at least that's the parent company, the creator of Minecraft believed if you're a real game developer, you should build from scratch. I don't necessarily believe that. You can't build everything from scratch, including your house and your desk and your computer. We need to use the resources we have, and that's why we're learning AI. AI is a huge resource. But even thinking of that linear progress, AI has changed so much in the last 6 months that you really got to stay on top of it. So I just want to encourage you. I'm going to show you how I set up Unity, not in grave detail. What I'm going to do is just show you through learning. So I may fast forward some of this. You can pause and kind of zoom in if you want to. I may speak to certain areas that I'm learning or something that I caught on to. But the short and skinny of this is that I'm going to learn in real time here and make a video of it so you can see what it takes to make products. So let's get started here. I have Unity up. I have ChatGPT on the left. I'm really just going to start doing this and vibe coding without talking much about it. And you can just watch and follow along or take some notes. So what I'm doing here is just learning how this structure is supposed to work. If you look at the scenes here, I know this is pretty small, but I have top-down engine here, and I'm pulling in a scene. So I have my main koala scene, or actually my main scene is here. Don't save. So I have the first invasion scene is what I'm calling it. That's from the koala game. I renamed it and pulled it in. What I'm now learning is through top-down engine, there's this folder with a bunch of assets, okay? So I'm going to be pulling these assets into my new scene over time. Maybe eventually getting rid of this top-down engine folder if I need to. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe I can build the game and just ignore this folder so it's not additional bloat. But right now I'm just communicating with ChatGPT. It has access to documentation and how people have done this in the past. And so I'm just digging in to say, hey, what's the best structure starting? You want to make sure that we don't go too crazy just editing and destroying things, because then you just get into a mess and you don't understand how you got there. So in this case, I'm going to continue to figure out how I should structure this game for optimal future performance. And it helps to communicate with GP2, maybe has that context. So that's it. realized for a bit that even though I wanted to make a top-down shooter game, I didn't spend enough time designing what it is that I actually wanted. And I didn't even spend enough time kind of researching how this top-down engine works. And so getting in here and playing with some of the demos that they have has really broadened my perspective on what we're capable of, or what this engine's capable of. I think I have a long road ahead of me in order to get this working the way that I want it to. But that's why we're here. We're here to study. We're here to learn. We're here to figure out how things work and use that in our design. So I'm actually going to use ChatGPT to figure out how to design this game, what I want to have in it. Obviously, I have ideas of how I want the game to flow. I want to make this space shooter type game. I started importing some of the assets and realized, okay, I don't really understand how the import works or how I can adjust the original engine to work with my new game. So that's what I'm going to explore. That's what I'm currently exploring. But it's neat to jump in and play the game a little bit and get a better idea of the tools that are already created inside the engine, which I can leverage, right? The animations, the shooting, the different types of destructible blocks or indestructible or movable blocks or doors. Maybe they can be turned into warp gates. So there's a lot of really cool structure here that I can reuse that I'm excited to dig into. So don't underestimate exploration. Sometimes we just want to jump into things and start creating, but there's a lot of value in design. There's a lot of value in thinking through process and how you want to do something. Still jump in, right? You still have to jump in to try things, but you can always pause and go back and say, am I doing the right thing at the right time? So that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm just going to explore this game a little more and then dive in again. So there's a couple of things I've realized. Number one, you may have noticed that I'm doing some editing or learning over multiple days, which I think is great. I want to encourage you to jump in every day, anytime you have free time to learn something. I left yesterday thinking, man, I don't know if I'm starting at the right space here. I'm still exploring this engine. And so I started watching some or listening to some tutorials throughout the day, maybe as I was driving. And I found a couple tutorials that talked about a more minimal approach to getting this started. So that's what I'm jumping into now. And then I also realized that the game I wanted to create is more of like a 20 minutes till dawn, but kind of a space-like game. And so I started talking to ChatGPT to help me work through the game design and really getting a solid base of how I want this game to play. And so, although this is kind of just the mashup of how someone learns, how you should dig in, and how this can be messy, right? Learning new things and doing things like this is messy, and I encourage you to just jump in and do it anyway. That way you can learn. But this is not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect for you either. You just got to do the work. You got to dig in, see what other people have done, use AI to your advantage, use YouTube tutorials, etc., and just jump in and figure it out. So I'm going to continue grinding and figure this out, see if I can get a model in here that has some movement, and then go from there. So here we go. It's not too terrible. We got the ship in. You can move it around. I mean, we made it. um, So baby steps, right? Like there's a lot that we still need to do. We still need to make this, do things and shoot and have abilities and probably not be able to jump. I don't know. Maybe jumping's kind of interesting. Maybe we need to affect the gravity. So I'm going to explore more of the game design ideas. I'm going to jump into what I want this game to actually do, how I want the ship to function. Maybe I want boosters coming out the back, right? What do I want it to look like? So join me on that journey. We're going to figure this out together. And thank you for just kind of watching the mess of what it takes to kind of learn and build something. I'm really excited to see this come together, and I hope you are too, and joining me on this. So until next time, I will see you later.